because on all those 11 exams I did get fives on, I studied proportionally way less than what I studied on for US history. So there's kind of like a game to it where you have to know what to study for, know how to study for, and most importantly, know what content and what information you can ignore from your teacher.
So, welcome to Mr. AP, and today we'll be interviewing an academic weapon. Mr. R, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Yo, what's going on, guys? I guess my name is Mr. R. I am a rising senior at a high school in Colorado. And yeah.
hmm All right. So, would you like to tell us about your story of AP academic comeback that you wanted to share?
Right. So freshman year, I took one AP class, US history. It's a pretty difficult class. Um, but I did pretty well in the class. I got A's both semesters. But the exam did really catch me off guard, and I ended up getting a three. Obviously, I studied all year for it. Basically, I think it's the most amount of time I've ever put into one AP course. So getting a three was pretty disappointing. Obviously, I still passed. But in my mind, I thought I could do a lot better. The year after my sophomore year, I took four APs. I took Chinese, Spanish language, calculus BC, and world history, and I got all fives. Junior year, I took seven comparative government, US government, both physics C's, English lang, psychology, and Spanish literature, and all fives on all of them. So I think that I have some valuable information to say about how to actually do well on the exam itself. Because on all those 11 exams I did get fives on, I studied proportionally way less than what I studied on for US history. So there's kind of like a game to it where you have to know what to study for, know how to study for, and most importantly, know what content and what information you can ignore from your teacher.
Okay, thank you. We'll let you talk about a little bit about like tips and
Yeah.
taking a lot of APs in a while. But hold on, our second question is like GPA plays an important role in college acceptance. So were you more focused on GPA consistency or ensuring high score on AP exams, or like a little bit of both?
I'd say the way I approached it was definitely to score well on these exams. The way I thought about it was GPA is important, but if I can get kind of test out of taking some classes in college and get ahead on that, that's more important to my future. However, I was lucky enough to have a lot of teachers where the way they graded was based on exam content. They kind of taught the exam instead of kind of teaching their own thing. So a lot of our grades was based on practice pre-response questions, practice multiple choice questions that really mimic what the exam would be like. But that's not to say that always happened. My world teacher, for example, she made us like color in maps like we were kindergartners all day. So I really had to take initiative and step up and kind of uh, self-study, I guess, more of the exam content, and just kind of do the classwork, do the homework as kind of just like a side thing. So I do know some teachers like to assign supplemental projects that really don't help your performance on the exam. But I just say just get that stuff done, do basically the bare minimum to get yourself a good grade, and then really truly focus on that exam.
Okay, thank you. So third question is, did you balance said APs with any extracurricular activities that limited time for studying?
Yes, absolutely. These last 2 years where I took the 11 AP exams that I got all fives on, uh, the whole time I was involved in, I want to say 3 to 4 extracurriculars strictly at school, holding leadership positions. Um, for the past like 4 or 5 years, I ran constant private tutoring over the weekends, which kind of just took up, I guess, a few hours over the weekend. I recently started a TikTok page. And this last year, I've been writing a book, which takes literally 10 to 20 hours out of every single week I had. So it definitely practiced my time management skills. I have a notes app on my phone where I literally have to section out every single hour of my day. So it might be like 6 o'clock, do some practice, I don't know, Gov FRQ, 7 o'clock, go to the English language Collegeboard course and exam description and see what essays work and what essays don't work. Maybe 8 o'clock, do a practice physics FRQ. Um, so, and especially when kind of exam season rolled around, like April, May, um, if you just look through my notes app, you can definitely see how like I kind of shifted away from my extracurriculars and I was like, okay, it's time to lock in and focus on doing well in these exams. Um, so yeah, definitely I gave myself more time when exam season rolled around, but definitely you have to balance that with something else. And on top of that, it's not like really fun studying for these exams at all, especially if you're doing like a lot of them. So I would just say view your extracurriculars as like a break. You know, you're doing something else for a certain amount of time, and that should feel fun to you.
All right, so next one is do you have least or most favorite AP you have taken?
So my least favorite AP, I'm probably biased because I didn't score well, is US history. Um, I thought the problem with US history is it's such an in-depth look at a span of 200 to 300 years, where you're not only covering the actual historical events, like the social political events, you're covering the arts, you're covering the culture, you're covering like this stuff pretty in-depth. You're covering the economy, you're covering different presidents, you're covering different scandals, you're covering like a lot of different things. That's just kind of super hard to keep track of. You're not really sure. The class doesn't really feel like it has a direction because it's focused on so many things in a super short time period. If you look at a class like world history, which I do agree is easier, that just focuses strictly on the history of it, right? This person was at this place, this country fought that country. Exactly. My favorite AP probably has to be either physics, E&M, or psychology. Both of these kind of were really interesting to me. Um, Obviously, psychology is a lot easier than physics. But yeah, both are really pretty interesting. I think if the content is engaging and if you're actually engaging with the content and you like the content, then the class will be a lot more fun for you.
Okay, so what do you think is the hardest and easiest AP you have taken?
So I think by far, like it's not even close, the hardest AP I've ever taken, and in my opinion, overall the hardest AP. I haven't taken them all, but come on. I think it's definitely Spanish literature, especially if you're a non-native speaker. So I'm not a native speaker at all. I started learning Spanish like in the middle of middle school, and Spanish literature is just super challenging if you're not native. The course you have to there's 40 required readings from all the way from short stories to poems to literally entire novels, um, where it's so impossible to kind of know everything that you just kind of have to pray that the exam is lucky for you. Again, all the questions are in Spanish. You have to listen to Spanish and answer questions, multiple choice questions that are in Spanish. You're given writing prompts in Spanish and you have to respond to those in Spanish. And you're literally doing literary analysis in Spanish, which is just crazy. So that one by far is definitely the hardest, especially if you're a non-native speaker. Easiest one, I would either say if you're a native speaker in any language, your exam like that language should be pretty easy to you. For example, I'm native in Chinese. The Chinese exam was probably the easiest one I've ever taken. But I would say other than that, probably either US government or psychology. I know US government is the content is pretty straightforward. The only problem with it is that everyone knows US government already to like a pretty good extent, to the point where the cutoff for 4s and 5s is really difficult. So you have to get a lot of questions right. I want to say like 80 or 90% of the exam correct to get like a 4 or a 5. So I would say psychology is probably easier in that sense.
Last question we have is if so, yeah, the tips. So I guess it was somewhat covered, but if you had tips for someone taking lots of simultaneous AP classes, what would they be?
Right. So I'll give you 3 tips that I really haven't heard much on the internet before when I was kind of scouring the same content. The first tip is like your approach to the exam content. You should be thinking about everything in a systemic nature. This is called like systemic thinking. Everything you learn in class, everything you learn in the course somehow relates to another concept in the course. And this is what Collegeboard wants to test you on. They're not testing whether you know like strict facts. Maybe some questions they'll just be like, oh, what does this mean? But they're mostly testing how you see the content interact with each other and how you can apply that content to other things. So if you can really think about kind of when you're studying, not just like kind of memorize, not just keep writing down your notes, but really truly think about how does A apply to B, how can A relate to B, and how does A interact with B? Then if you have that understanding of the content, then you don't even have to worry about kind of rote memorization because you already kind of know how things interact with each other. I think this is extremely important in history and social science classes, where it's very conceptual, to the point where you need to have a good understanding of how things interact with each other. In terms of STEM classes such as like physics, calculus, chemistry, even, it's the same thing, but it's a lot easier to do because it's, the ways things are connected with each other is pretty obvious, right? Obviously, like derivatives are going to, interact directly with integrals. The like entire class is kind of based on those interactions. But in the class, like let's say US government or comparative government, you don't want to approach it as like strictly memorizing vocabulary, strictly memorizing terms. You kind of want to see how things interact with each other. The second, I think this is the most important tip I have, is that online resources and the official College Board information they give out, the course and exam description, is far more helpful and far more trustworthy than your teachers. Again, teachers are, I would say College Board, the way they audit these courses is not very strict. So teachers can really teach whatever they want, but you should never trust what your teacher says if it goes directly against something that you found online. If you just search up the course and exam description, and again, I've searched these up, I have them all bookmarked on my tabs, every single course and exam description, because everything in there is strictly what College Board outlines can be on the test. If it's not in the course and exam description, they're not going to test you on it. So if you're ever wondering, do I need to know this content? You can just literally go to the course and exam description. It tells you literally every single thing, word for word, of what you need to know. So even though your teacher can be like, oh, you need to do this, oh, you need to do that, oh, this essay, you need to have 3 pieces of evidence, as long as the course and exam description says otherwise, you shouldn't trust your teacher. Again, you need to take initiative of your own kind of education and seek out external help, because what your teachers say might not always be right. And my third and final advice would definitely be time management. You need to start thinking about this pretty early. I know College Board has already released its AP exam dates for 2024. They released them really early. So I would say get a look on that, put those exams in your calendar, know what to study for, when to study for it. I would say my biggest, or the way I organized my studying was I did it by units. College Board breaks down conceptually every unit by like every course into like, I would say anywhere between like 5 or 10 units. Okay, so in like a classroom environment, usually the units are divided up differently from what College Board divides the units up into. I would heavily recommend following College Board's units rather than what your teacher does, because again, if College Board is defining this is unit 1, this is unit 2, this is unit 3, if you're studying through the perspective of what College Board wants you to know, you're going to have a lot better time of, you're going to have a way easier job of acing that exam, basically. Don't get too down on your exam score. I learned this my first year. I bet you learned it your first year also, because like, especially for some of these classes and exams, they're really poorly designed, in my opinion. For example, in the histories, 25% of your entire exam grade is based on one question, the document-based question, the DBQ, right? So if that's something you completely don't know about, or your teacher just never taught you, or if it's something as specific, I remember one year in world history, it was about the second Mexican Revolution, which rarely any teachers taught. Like if that's your DBQ, then that kind of screws you over for the whole thing. However, I would say any part of the exam where you can study for, and you kind of can predict, I would say focus on that. Focus on what you can study for. In Spanish, for example, multiple choice was always a toss-up for me. I have no clue what the passage is saying. I have no clue what the questions are even asking me because they're in another language. I would always just kind of guess on at least half of them. But what I knew I could do well was the essays, and the free response questions, because basically I didn't know the language. I don't know Spanish, but I can kind of pick out a few phrases that I like to use and just keep using those phrases, to kind of, it's not really faking it, but it's kind of selectively, what would you call it? It's kind of like memorizing a kind of stratified sample of like fancy vocabulary words to show the person that's reading your essay, hey, I actually know these vocabulary words, but in reality, you spent like 20 hours behind the scenes kind of prepping these words, being like, okay, I'm going to use destakar as a verb instead of maybe mostrar or something, right? You're gonna kind of selectively be like, okay, here's how I'm gonna show my reader that I know big vocabulary when in reality I don't actually know big vocabulary. For Spanish language, what I did for the speaking portion was I would literally, you have 2 minutes to speak on like a present on like a culture. I would have a 30-second introduction already prepared before I walk into that exam because I know what the general question is going to be asking. So it's like this quick introduction. Today I'm going to introduce this, this, and this. And you all do it with fancy vocabulary so that the person that's grading your exam was like, wow, this kid actually knows their stuff.
Do you think there was like a factor or like a person or group of people that like helped you, like motivated you through hard times or something like that, helped you get through the APs? And then also, can you just go over all the APs you're taking this year for your final year of high school?
Yeah, of course. For the first one, I think I'm a really independent person, so it was mainly just for me, especially when I got when I didn't do well my very first year. I remember writing on like my whiteboard, I'm like, okay, like this year's goals, I'm getting all 5s on all 7 of my exams. Like I don't care, I'm doing it. But again, looking up to other people is definitely a huge inspiration, being like, oh wow, this guy did really good on their exams. I can't really think of one specific person or group, but it's just kind of a personal thing, you know. If I'm putting this much time into something, I want to see those results reflected. And since that didn't happen my very first year, my second year I kind of took a step back and I'm like, okay, what went wrong? What was wrong with my approach, and how can I kind of rework my approach so that I can do better this time? And I think that my sophomore and junior year, that's something that I was pretty successful at. Next year I'm taking, I think 6. So English literature, microeconomics, macroeconomics, computer science A, statistics, and biology. Nice. So I think I'll have 18 total by the end. 18. But I think it needs to be noted that my school has it's a huge public school and we offer a ton of AP exams. We have everything except for I think psychology, which I self-studied. So yeah, I'm pretty lucky, and there's no like cap. Like they literally let you take so many every year. So,
well, I wish you luck on the future APs. But yeah, thank you for your time. We appreciate you making this interview with us. So, thank you for sharing your story and completing this interview.
Of course. And if you're interested, you guys should all follow me on my TikTok.
Yep.
At Nick's Numerals. You should pop it up like right here.
I will.
At Nick's Numerals. My book is getting published soon. If y'all want to buy it, I don't care. I don't know. Buy it if you want. But yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Sweet.